because we have another bone to pick with you here real briefly before we go.
Okay.
Which is, I have just been informed by the great Brian Last that Wild Bull Curry is not in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. What the fuck? As Hurricane would say, what's up?
You want me on? I'll put him on the ballot. I got nothing against Bull Curry. You know that.
But how the fuck can Wild Bull Curry not have already? See, that's just one of those things. If you
there are guys. Look, there's so many guys. There's so many guys that I think should be in the Hall of Fame that aren't. Both older and newer guys, and hopefully in time they'll get in. I don't.
Has there been an anti-Bull Curry faction that would have?
There's no anti-Bull Curry faction. The problem, and you know this better than anyone.
Fans against eyebrows.
There are guys that unfortunately history has forgotten, and far too many because of the nature of this weird business. Where the and unfortunately he was one of them in the sense that but there's a lot of them. Where there were guys that were big stars that for whatever reason. Once your company dies that you're the big star of, your history dies. Well, but
I'm just, and I know, and you're exactly right, and especially, because Ole Anderson's not in somehow. Jerry Jarrett's not in somehow. I don't understand.
Well, Jerry Jarrett probably will end up in, and Ole, Ole may or may not. I don't know. There's no way of knowing that one. I mean, but it's hard to get the votes. It's really, really hard. But it should be hard. It should be hard. If
there are exceptions like that, but Bull Curry, 40 years as a main event guy, the face, the iconic name and visage, top guy in everywhere from Connecticut to from New England to Texas to fucking Florida to blah, blah, blah. How 20 years ago, when there were still some Bull Curryites around and kicking, how in the world was there not a massive clamor for Wild Bull?
No one ever brought up. But it's like there's a lot of guys. Again, I could put them on the ballot. I will put them on the ballot. I got nothing against Bull Curry.
You know what? Here's the thing. And I hate to make this sound morbid, but I mean, the issues that you do that are my favorites of the Observer are the obituary issues because there's such.
I'm doing lots of them now.
But they're such detailed, descriptions and depictions of the guy's career and how over a lot of these guys were that even those of us who think of ourselves as students of the profession. Oh my God, he did that also and that and that. Well, look at those numbers. And so I like those. And I think the way to get into the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame over the past few years is die and get elected the next year because everybody remembers how great you were.
Well, I do think that probably put Curtis Alkay over the edge. Because his big fame was being, a legend in Australia, New Zealand. I mean, he was a star everywhere in the United States, of course. Yeah. But it was really Hawaii, Australia, New Zealand, which, yes, the people in Australia and New Zealand know. In New Zealand, he's actually probably the most famous foreign wrestler. In Australia, he's in that list with King Curtis and Killer Kowalski and Ray Stevens and DiNucci and all them. But in Hawaii, he's probably, I guess, if I would say the iconic wrestler in Hawaii, it'd probably be Curtis. He had more main events than anybody else for sure, because I looked it up when he died. But it's like, but when that came out and people did see that, I do think that helped. And some people see that as a negative. I see that as a positive. The fact that I could write a story, and again, I didn't write the story to get Curtis in the Hall of Fame by any means, but as I'm writing the story,
it just reminds people.
Yes, same thing happened with Albano.
Albano's another. Well, yeah. Albano, you know what? I mean, Albano. The thing with Albano is that so many people saw him at the end of his run when he was kind of a caricature of himself, and I think that hurt him, and it made people forget that, again, and in his territory, everybody would vote for him for the Hall of Fame. But again, he was a one territory guy, and when he finally went national, he really wasn't very good anymore. Because, babyface manager's a tough role. He was older. They didn't really want him to get over. He was more, there's all the reasons it didn't work when, in the 80s when he would be brought back. But in the 70s, he was the number one manager that they had. But the other thing, too, is there were so many guys. I mean, I cannot say that Lou Albano was a better manager than Ken Ramey, and nobody knows Ken Ramey. There's guys out there. There's guys out there that people don't know about. It kind of breaks my heart. When Ken Ramey passed away, I wrote a big story on him because, again, it's like people don't even know the name. Oh, I tell you what broke my heart once was years ago. So I wrote when John Tolis passed away, obviously, and you guys all know John Tolis. Yeah. And I wrote the big story on John Tolis, and then the big reaction was, I've never heard of this guy. Who is this guy? And it's
oh my God.
Oh, it was so sad, but it's like, why would they have heard of John Tolis? I mean, obviously, if you lived here, especially or Los Angeles in particular, I mean, that's the most famous angler there ever was, but it's 46 years ago now. So it's a long time ago.
Hey, Dave, if I could ask you about a few specific names, and obviously, it's the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, but there's voting, so it's not like you just induct anyone you want. And I appreciate
look, there's plenty of guys that I want in that don't get in. Plenty. And and if I campaign for them, people say I'm cheating. It's like, I think I should have the right to talk about the Hall of Fame. And I mean, I've gone years without talking about it, but I'm breaking my moratorium at some point this year.
Good.
And I'm going to talk about it. But
because you're going to make the big pitch for the fabulous Moolah, right?
No, I mean, there's a lot of more modern people and a lot of older people, and but anyway, go ahead. Yeah,
well, it's the older ones that I think about more, just because the further we get away from their careers and there being any footage of them, it's easier for them to be left in the dust. So the first name I asked,
you're absolutely right about that. Yeah,
Bull Curry's one that I'm really behind. The other one, and I think this may technically be part of the historical category you have, where you don't actually put it on the ballot, but you have a group of historians who would vote. But I think Morris Siegel is a real...
That's an interesting one. That's someone that, that's definitely an interesting one. Yeah, because he ran Houston forever, and he ran the whole Texas office, and Texas was a big hotbed of wrestling in the 50s, especially. So yeah.
And we just did the kayfabe commentaries, Bruce and I, on Houston, and when you take into it, Morris Siegel started in 1919, and Paul Bosch. 1915, and Paul Bosch retired in 1987. So that was 72 years that city was under only 2 promoters.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
and that's probably unique in this country.
Well, what else would be like the Tunnies in Toronto? They didn't. I think they probably go back to around 1930 to until Jack was done. So, but yeah, that's amazing that you had. Morris Siegel, and Paul was essentially Morris Siegel's protege, right?
Yeah, because Paul didn't actually take over the office till he died in 1967. So Paul had it for 20 years, but Morris Siegel had it for 51.
Wow, amazing!
Even though he was in kind of ill health toward the end and whatnot, I don't think he was going around nailing up posters every day. But you know what I'm saying.
That's definitely a good name, Morris Siegel. Yeah, absolutely.
Name number 2. I'm curious if you think anything will change, because this does go into that category of guys you recently did an obituary for. And in doing so, I think you opened a lot of people's eyes to his career. And I'd be curious what your thoughts are. Mario Milano.
Yeah, Okay, so this is like a weird thing, okay? Everyone in Australia will tell you he has to be in the Hall of Fame. But outside of Australia, he wasn't a Hall of Fame wrestler. Now, he did have success in some places. He was fairly big in New York for a while, and they even considered him for the WWF title, so he was actually pretty big. And actually in Tennessee, I think was the first place he had success.
Yeah.
I think Mario Milano. Okay, it's weird because like here's the thing, because I used to talk to Barnett about Australia all the time, and to the fans of Australia, because Mario Milano came to Australia, got married to an Australian woman, and stayed forever. In the culture, he became so big. But in the heyday, Barnett would tell me, like Danucci was much bigger, and he drew much bigger. Danucci drew big, Kowalski drew big, Arion drew big,
yeah.
And it's like, and Milano drew for a couple of years and all that, and but not as big as them. But culturally, in Australia, people remember Milano longer than anyone because he stayed and he was part, and he did indie shows till he was in his 50s, and he would be on, the morning show, talk show, if they needed to interview an old wrestler. There's Mario Milano. So everybody knows, he's a household name there. So more than Danucci and more than Arion and maybe more than even Kowalski, who's probably the guy who really was I'd say Kowalski, Ray Stevens, and Danucci were the guys who really set the territory on fire. it's weird because how do you do voting? Because people outside of Australia probably aren't going to vote for him, but in Australia he's going to get every vote. But should that be the case? Because an example, and it's like it's weird. That's what makes the Hall of Fame weird. Another example of someone, and Jim knows this, and I think Dave Brown, without a doubt, is a Hall of Famer. I mean, I would, but never get. He'll never get votes outside of Memphis because if you didn't grow up with him or you weren't a tape trader and saw him in his time and thing, it's like the name Dave Brown means a lot in Memphis, but it doesn't mean a lot in New York or Florida. And I don't think, and people can't understand it. I mean, no matter, you can tell them, but they won't understand it. But it's like there are guys like that. And, that's the one of the flaws of the voting being a worldwide voting is that the guys who went to a lot of different places are going to have an advantage because they were stars in more places, or guys who were guys who were exalted by certain people, or given credibility by WWE. I mean, as stars, whether they deserved it or not, are going to have an edge over guys who may have been a lot bigger stars in their day, but
what you're saying is Mildred Burke is going to come back from the grave and pry Mae Young out of the coffin.
But I mean, it is interesting the way history is written about women's wrestling. Not, as far as WWE did that big history piece on women's wrestling and Mae Young and Moolah, and it's like, well, what about Cora Livingstone and Mildred Burke? Cora Livingstone was probably more of a pioneer than anyone, and Mildred Burke was the biggest women's star, much bigger than obviously Moolah or Mae Young. But it's not their thing because, Moolah was a friend of the McMahon families and Mae is Stephanie McMahon's personal favorite grandmother type, and there's nothing wrong with that. So she's become, she's now the iconic woman of wrestling because of Stephanie. And it's
but for the grace of God could have been Cora Combs.
Yeah, really.
It could have been Cora Combs. I mean, right? I mean, Cora Combs, like Mae Young's unique personality. Cora had the same similar, unique, feisty old woman personality. I mean, I remember being around Cora. She was as entertaining as hell. I think she was more entertaining than Mae. But whatever, it's a matter of choice. But the point is, you're right. What was the difference between Cora Combs and Mae Young, other than the fact that Mae Young got that run at the end?
I think
the relationship with Moolah, that was the difference.
Well, yeah. Plus, Mae probably beat up a few more men than Cora did, and Cora certainly wore a better bikini when she was younger. Holy mackerel! Back in 1949, old Cora Combs, she's an Eastern Kentucky girl. Anyway.
I guess that's so funny. As I remember, Lance Russell used to tell me about that. It's like Cora Combs. Oh my God, young Cora Combs. Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, one more name for you, and this kind of goes into what you were just talking about with the Dave Brown discussion. Bill Dundee, who was obviously
that's a real interesting one too. That's a real interesting one
because it's wrestler and booker.
Yeah. I mean. As far as if there's a Memphis Hall of Fame, Bill Dundee goes in right after Fargo and Lawler, right? Pretty close, whatever. But outside of Memphis, was he a Hall of Famer? No. I mean, he did book Mid-South during its most successful period, no doubt about it. It's funny to me.
Actually, once again, but Dundee's work was so good and so unique. Except for his working punches, which would rattle your fucking chains. But his work was so good and so unique that he got over in a place where he could make a great living and more money than he could anywhere else in the country. So he stayed there, but that penalizes him with exposure.
But the thing is when he did leave, he was never really a big star anywhere else. But again,
when he left, booking in Mid-South was his strength. As a wrestler anywhere else, he never had the support or the direction to go be a main event guy.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the things that again, I do think that because so much of the Memphis footage has actually survived, maybe because of you, because, Memphis.
I think most of it is, yeah.
Yeah, because if you look at like the old stuff, I mean, the WWF kept some footage, maybe even a lot from the 70s. So there's that. But all of like the San Franciscos and the St. Louis and the Florida, all that footage, Georgia when in the 70s when it was really hot, right? But any territory, because most of the footage is gone. And so I think that really does, that does to a degree help Dundee in the sense that people can look up and see those old 79, 80, 81 Memphis shows, and you can't look up and see the same for, most other places. So, there is that. And I think that, Jarrett did keep older clips because I remember when I would watch Memphis in like 82, 83, I would see like videos of stuff from like 75, and it's God knows nobody in 81, 82 had kept their videos from 75.
Yeah, well, the problem was it was a lot of the same stuff because they didn't keep everything. They just kept really. You saw
but I saw that Jerry Lawler first music video where he was driving in the car. Remember that one?
Yes. Oh yeah. No,
It's like man, that's amazing.
And actually, I saved. Lawler had saved that. He was using. He had a coffee table. And he was using those old 3/4 inch tapes to hold something up or down or something. And I said, Jerry, let me borrow those. And I got copies of those in 1980.
Well, my God, that stuff that you have on the Carolinas. Oh my God. Could you imagine if we didn't have that? Yeah. It's like, I watched that with some friends, maybe about a year ago. And it was just like, this is the one thing. It was a couple independent guys were here too. And we were watching, Flair, Steamboat, and Murdoch, and the stuff, right? And the thing wasn't the work, although the work was great, but it was the frickin' crowds, and they're going like, oh my God, can you imagine a wrestler today that never grew up on this because they're much too young, and geographically, but was much too young to have ever seen that kind of crowd reaction. Because you get you can get a lot of noise and stuff at matches today, and there is superheated matches, but it's a very different kind of heat. It just is.
Yeah.
And that heat on those tapes where you're listening to it, it's like, oh my God, how much fun would it be to perform in front of crowds like that? And unfortunately,
that's
hey, look, I know. It's like people. There's stuff that's damaged. That some of it's evolution, some of it's been damaged, and it's unfortunate. It's like but you got the problem is that you can't go back and do exactly that because unfortunately everything's different. You don't have your local heroes. It doesn't mean as much. You don't have your local championships, and it's slapped in the face that it's what it is to the point. More than it needs to be. More than it's like, again, I know when I'm going to the movies that it's not real, but in the middle of the movie, during the most heated scene, they don't tell me that oh, by the way, this is my real name and I'm playing this character and all that. But in wrestling, they sometimes feel the need to do that, and it takes you out of the moment. And but that's the people who run the business. That's their. They want to be all things, and it's the weirdest business in the world because just like an example, like when you have guys on Twitter, that are taking pictures of themselves with the guy that they're supposed to hate, on vacation, hanging out together in Europe. You know what I'm saying? It's
just like two bros doing podcasts, man.
Yeah, it's different and it's weird, and sometimes I feel like. If you do complete 100% your character in social media like Matt Hardy, I would say like it's silly, but then Matt Hardy went and did it and proved that it wasn't silly, even though because it made his thing work, But Matt Hardy's another example. It's like the Matt Hardy character is completely the whole every bit of the Matt Hardy broken character in those videos that they did. It was so tongue in cheek, but it did revitalize his career to the point that like. When I watch him in WWE, I'm going like, God, why is he doing that ancient character when he should be doing this new one? And obviously for legal reasons, I know why. But it's like that character, in a sense, when I first saw it, it was like, oh, this is really goofy. It's so tongue-in-cheek. But for whatever reason, it caught on. That's like I said, goofy stuff can catch on and be a positive too.
And by the way, hashtag fuck that owl. But anyway, we're going to wind up for a couple of reasons. One, we have agreed. We have just agreed on all y'all's on our previous statements because I do love the Hardys and I do wish the crowds would be the way that they were. And you did mention that the Lost Mid-Atlantic Classic films are available at jimcornette.com. 18 discs, 36 hours of the greatest workers in the greatest matches of the 70s in the Carolinas.
I want to tell you something. I swear to God, everybody, this is not plugging because I'm on your show. Everybody needs to watch that. Just, if you're a wrestler, and again, just for the knowledge of what it once was, because it's again, you're getting, it's like, you may hear about Ric Flair, this and that, but unless you see Ric Flair in his environment at the point, like not after he got over, and which is not to say he wasn't great for long after, because he was, and he was more polished in certain ways after, but to see the young Ric Flair and the young Ricky Steamboat as they were rising and see, what they were doing and how the crowds were, it's just great to me, it's just great educational footage for anyone. And it's great wrestling with great wrestlers, some of which people know about and some of which, like again, when people go back and watch Murdoch, who's the perfect example. I don't think people remember Murdoch. I mean, you and I do, and know how freaking great that guy was. I mean, as far as just little things and everything, but even he clowned around too. I mean, I remember seeing, Murdoch do the Three Stooges stuff too, but as far as like a working talent, my God damn, that guy's one of my favorites.
Well, there you have it. Buy those films now, folks, aspiring wrestlers. And Dave, thank you for being on the program, because my final reason for wrapping up is Daddy's got a small bladder.